Please enjoy this uninterrupted episode brought to you by CourseDog. CourseDog is the intelligent academic operations platform unifying how higher ed managers schedule curriculum, catalog assessments, and more. Built on a layer of actionable analytics and seamless integrations with every major SIS and LMS, CourseDog is where academic operations drive student success. To learn more, please go to coursedog.com. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. This is Owen Freitas, co-founder of the EdUp Experience. And as you know, I'm always in the background, but sometimes I come out in the front because we have a super cool guest and a super cool co-host today. So let me bring in my co-host, who you have heard before. She is Bridget Moran, and she's a senior content manager at CourseDog. Bridget, how you doing today?
Hi, Elvin. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to be co-hosting with you. I think this is our first time recording together.
Yeah, first time, and it's rare, like extremely rare. Like usually I'm in the background, so I'm happy to be here with you. And the way I work is I like to get right into it, Bridget. So I'm going to bring our guest in today, and she is Dr. Erika Latty. She's a president of the enterprise and chief academic officer at Unity Environmental University. Erika, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. And so, as I said to Bridget, I like to jump right in. So I'm going to ask you the first question. Erika, tell us about everything that you do. What do you do? How do you do it? Go for it.
Sure. So I have an interesting title, the president of the enterprise. It sounds a little bit like Star Trek or something along those lines. But the enterprise is an example of shared services at Unity Environmental University. And so we organize ourselves a little bit differently than other universities might do. And so we use something that we call the enterprise model. And the enterprise model means that we have a number of centralized services at the university that we provide to different business verticals. And the different business verticals are things like distance education or our in-person education, or some of our sustainable ventures, or some of the businesses that we own that are really real life manifestations of our curriculum. And so it is such that our centralized services may be needed by some of these verticals, or they may not be necessary in a given vertical. So for example, something I oversee is accreditation within the academic functional area. And that isn't something that our businesses are particularly interested in, but our distance education programs are, as well as our in-person education programs. So then some of the work that I do at the university is I oversee a number of functional areas, including academics and student success, but also facilities and information technology and career services. And so depending on the nature of the unit within that functional area, I may be working directly with some of our business verticals, like our online programming, or it may be a very decentralized unit. And when something's highly decentralized, it really lives within the business vertical, but I oversee some of the compliance and controls associated with that. And I think an important sort of feature here is that our centralized services are kind of almost like a nervous system for the whole array of the work we do at Unity Environmental University. But the decentralized pieces are also critical, but they're decentralized because they're so audience specific. So that our instructional capabilities, for example, within academics are very decentralized because we expect that the instruction to look a little different in the online programs than it is in the in-person programs. They'll have different sort of pedagogical techniques they're employing. They have different audiences that they're catering to, and therefore they're highly decentralized. But the centralized component there are critical sort of features of that we need to make sure that are within sort of the compliance or the expectations of our accreditation, for example. So I'm ensuring that even though there's decentralization of our instruction, that we're still complying with any sort of federal, like accrediting state agencies or any of those sorts of things. I have those controls in place. I think another good example of that is student success. That's highly decentralized because the students who are learning online have different needs. They need different supports than the students that are learning in person. So as a result, a lot of the autonomy or the authority over those sorts of services lie within the business unit, within the distance education group, or within the in-person education group. But again, we need to ensure that all groups have Title IX training or FERPA training or ADA training. So we do have controls in place. So we kind of create these sort of guidelines for the different business units to operate within. But then sort of at the other extreme, I oversee information technology, and we want everyone to use the same email system, for example. And so that's something that is highly centralized, but then there is some room within the different business units to maybe buy or use a technology that everyone at the university doesn't use, but there are certain expectations that everyone will use the same email system or everyone will use the same information system. So that's kind of how we decide a little bit about whether something's decentralized or centralized.
That's super interesting, Erica, and thank you for that overview. So it sounds like your role is probably just as non-traditional as the university is, right? I think it's pretty uncommon to hear a chief academic officer who is overseeing IT facilities. So I think that probably gives you a really unique perspective of how the university operates. So I'm curious, what are some of the more maybe unusual skills that you have to use in your role that you might not see at chief academic officers at other institutions?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, depending on the institution, a chief academic officer can have a fairly large portfolio, but as you know, and as it's suggested by the title, the focus is academics. And so the parts that I do there are probably a little more similar to the work that other chief academic officers do. I think something that I tend to be really involved in that may not always be the case for other CAOs is that this position has been in place as the university has grown over time. And so when I first began work as a chief academic officer, I was working with really sort of a traditional student body, somewhere around 600 students, um, and a few online learners. And then over time, that portfolio has grown to over 10,000 online learners and just a few hundred in-person students. And that kind of growth means that almost everything has to change. And so as a result, I've been really involved with sort of the structure, the organization, like how we organize ourselves, how we structure ourselves to ensure that we're able to serve learners at scale. And I probably spend more time doing that than other CAOs who may be just operating within an established structure. We're often re-envisioning, reimagining our structure. And so I spend a lot of time in that space. And then related to that, as we grow, we need to be able to scale. So I spend a lot of time in the information technology space too, which does require, as you all know, quite a specialized skill set. And I'm not going to suggest that I am the chief information officer. I work with the chief information officer, but I need to be able to think about technologies in sort of a maybe non-traditional way, need to be able to think a little bit more creatively about them so that we can ensure that we're leveraging them for scale. So I spend more time probably thinking about how we keep scaling, how we keep changing, instead of sort of protecting an established structure. Oftentimes in academics, things are kind of the same, right? So you have your faculty, you have your deans, you have your provost or some equivalent of that. And that structure is so well established, everyone's sort of living within that structure. Those are the kind of structures we push against in order to ensure that we're serving the learners with the kind of content that they need, with the services that they need. And if that means rethinking Greek era ideals or post, GI Bill ideals, then we need to go into those spaces. So I spend some time along with my colleagues moving into uncomfortable spaces in order to keep re-envisioning, reimagining, thinking about how we can really deliver a high quality product to our learners.
I love that. And I imagine too that part of your role is helping bring faculty along when you make some of these new organizational changes, reimagining structures. I was hoping you could, talk to us a little more about that. How do you work with faculty? How do you bring them along? Maybe what's an example of something you've worked on recently in that space?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good observation because the faculty model that is employed at a lot of universities is probably one of the more traditional pieces of a university. And that's because what a university is about learning in the end, right? And so we count on what we traditionally call as faculty members to deliver on that promise of content of, what is it that these students need to know within these disciplines and put it all together to be ready to sort of start that next phase of their career, be it graduate school or their first job or their third job. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about what that work is as a faculty member. And I also have been a traditional faculty member at other institutions as well. Um, and what we decided is when we took a hard look at what it means to be faculty, it really meant a lot of things, like maybe too many things for one person to be able to do effectively. So when we think about faculty, they're supposed to be at the top of their discipline. They need to understand all that complex disciplinary content, be able to do, original research in that content area, be able to distill complex topics and make them understandable by people trying to learn about them maybe for the first time or they might be more advanced within their college career. And so that's a big part of what faculty need to do, but that's not all they need to do. They also need to be able to really design a course for any modality, like be it in person, online. So they have to be able to distill that information, present it in a really intelligible way, and also have the correct assessments to ensure that, because at the end of the day, in a course, we want to ensure that students are really mastering the learning objectives with the course, but the assessments need to get us there. Did they understand the material or not? But then on top of that, the curriculum as a whole needs to be designed. There are programmatic learning outcomes as well as course level learning outcomes. And when the student graduates or completes their program, they need to have mastered or understood those programmatic learning outcomes. So there's a curriculum design piece, a course design piece, a technology piece that's all in addition to being a sort of a content or a subject matter expert. And as our technological tools become more advanced, some of those, the learning design has also, the thinking around that has become more advanced as well. So that's another skill set. And then on top of that, we often look for faculty to advise, particularly in the academic programs. And then we look for the faculty to assess all their programs. So we're asking faculty to assess their own work instead of always adding sort of a more objective lens onto that. So in the end, what we've decided is that's really too much to ask of a single individual. And so we've worked on what the faculty role is. It really is more than a one person kind of situation. So really to be comprehensive and to stay sort of up to date and current with current technologies, current disciplinary expertise, we've thought about instructors and we've thought about subject matter experts. We think about learning designers. We think about curriculum designers. We think about program advisors who are different than mentors in the field. And we also think about curriculum assessors. It's someone who can take a step back that's not so personally invested in the curriculum. They might be able to give a slightly more objective view on whether the curriculum is achieving its goals. And so when we took that step back and started thinking about all those different parts of the faculty workload, we ended up dividing it into 6 different people. So when we use faculty, we're not just talking about instructors or professors. We're talking about those people, instructors, professors, subject matter experts, but also our curriculum designers, who a lot of the time that is our deans. We're also thinking about our course designers, our learning experience designers, who are working within our LMS systems. And then we have enterprise. So go back to my earlier comment about being president of the enterprise. We have roles within the enterprise to ensure that we are assessing our curriculum in a systematic way, that it provides opportunities for us to iterate on the curriculum and improve the curriculum, along with those instructing it, those designing it at both the course level and the program level. So I guess what I would say is that the faculty role is a complex role. And so instead of trying to have one person do all that work, we divided that into at least 6 different roles at the university. And that's actually been very effective for us. But it was also challenging for people that had really been trained in a more traditional sort of faculty model. And it's also sometimes interesting to translate for when we're working with assessors or working with accreditors, and how we divide the workload up and how we're resourcing that workload. It's important for us to be able to do those translations into traditional systems, which isn't something that everyone is accustomed to doing. So we spend some time translating what we do into sort of more traditional systems for people to better understand us.
That's amazing. So it sounds like it's very much a team-based approach, which I really like there, where everyone kind of has their area of expertise, but all working towards that objective of, serving the student, making sure that they're getting that curriculum, which I really, really love. I think that's great. And you quickly touched on that curriculum piece, really having a team there that's kind of focused on that development, making sure it's successful. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. Before the podcast, I had a chance to go and see, what types of programs you're offering at Unity. Of course, I saw some of the, more traditional environmental sustainability focused programs, but also I found some really interesting ones on your website, agroforestry, regenerative hotel management, some really cool programs like that. So can you tell us kind of what's, the secret sauce behind the curriculum development? How do you find some of these, maybe more specific programs?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'd love to. Part of that is driven by our mission. And so our mission does have a sustainability science sort of component to it. So the mission is to provide accessible, affordable education sort of within this kind of sustainability lens. And when we use the term sustainability, we mean it pretty broadly because we honestly believe like there are components of sustainability that don't have to be political, but it can apply to operations, to, how environmentally friendly obviously something is, but also, are we sustainable from like a financial lens and that sort of thing. And so we take all that into account when we're designing our curriculum to stay true to our mission. But we also take a look at what is the workplace demanding? What are the emerging career fields? Because we don't want to be offering programs that aren't relevant for today's learners. And so that means, as a result, we look at sort of information about, where are the gaps in training? Like, what are we hearing from employers in terms of what students don't have enough sort of content expertise in or skills in? And so we start to take a look at those skills, we combine them with our mission, and we think through like, well, what does that curriculum look like? How are these learners prepared to be successful in these emerging career paths? And so that is a collaborative effort, as you suggested. So we do have teams of people that are looking at these sorts of questions, bringing it all together, and then having conversations about it so we can start to sketch out what a program might look like. And I think it's another place where we tend to differ a little bit from some other universities. Oftentimes there is some sort of curriculum committee at an institution that might be developing curriculum over time, and it's usually largely composed of traditional faculty, and there may be a provost or a dean in attendance and that sort of thing. We have a similar working group of people, but the roles of the people in that group tend to be a little bit different. So we have folks from marketing in those conversations. We have folks from student success in those conversations. We have folks from advancement in those conversations. We have folks from enterprise academics and also obviously the academics within whatever business unit we might be talking about, like the distance education or the the in-person education. So we have different groups working on new curriculum, and the expertise in those groups spans the functional areas of the university. We don't just ask the traditional academics, what do we need? We're asking a larger group. What is the need out there? How can we respond to it? How do we design our curriculum? And then we're not afraid to bring additional experts into the room. So we don't just base what we offer on whatever we happen to have currently in-house at that time in terms of expertise. So we have many strong marine biologists, for example, amongst our online and our in-person programs. But if we want to venture out into a new field and it doesn't align with marine biology, we look for that additional expertise. We hire that additional expertise, and that then informs the conversation. We really try not to restrict ourselves to just what we can do, but rather think about what do we need to do to serve the learners in this moment, and how do we make that happen? How do we change who's in the room? And so I think it's sort of an important piece. It's not just who's here at this moment, but what else do we need to add to the conversation? And then on the flip side of that, though, that means that we might have majors that are no longer relevant for learners. And that should tell us something. And instead of holding on to programs that aren't relevant, we may have to sunset a program to make space for a new program. But what we have found is the disciplinary expertise that was required to make the program that's being sunset, we often still need that disciplinary expertise in a new version of the program. And so for us, sunsetting doesn't mean we've let go a department, for example. We actually don't organize into departments. It's not a useful organizational tool for us. We're really interested in the expertise people bring to the table, offering that within the curriculum design sort of process. And when we decide that maybe a physics major isn't for us, usually the physicists in the room, we still need physics. Physics needs to exist somewhere in our curriculum, and those people aren't going anywhere. They're just going to be part of a new suite of majors. So I think we've let go of this idea that each individual is so tied to a major that if a new major comes on or a major goes away, so do those people. That's not the case, because really majors are very transdisciplinary, especially the ones that we focus on that have that sustainability lens. So people become less concerned, I think, about preserving a given major because they know there's still a lot of work for them to do. And they become more invested in what's the major we need at this time that serves the purposes of the learners.
I think that's a really great framing because I think so often you see in the news all of these institutions saying we're going to shut down these programs, and all of a sudden faculty are up in arms, even though there's maybe one student enrolled in the program. But like you said, these faculty, they're still providing important content to students who may just not be in their very, very specific domain of expertise. So I really love that. Something that I was thinking about as you were talking through this, it sounds like you've kind of solved for a lot of the challenges that come up in the traditional curriculum committee. Something that we see often times that's another challenge there is the speed to make a decision, right? You're waiting 5-10 years before you finally sunset that program, even though no student is enrolled. Or on the flip side, it's taking 2-3, maybe longer years to get a new program implemented that, employers are really seeking, students are interested in. So how do you kind of solve for that challenge of the speed with which you're responding to the market?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit on a really critical point. Higher ed is not known for its speed. And so we've addressed that in a number of different ways, but I think one of the critical ways we've done that is we don't have committees. So we don't have a committee structure because it is too slow. And what we were finding is you could have 40 committees at the university. Very few of them had any kind of output that was really advancing the needle. And the same people were on all 40 committees, and they were overworked and not really accomplishing much. I mean, to be honest, and I've been on those committees. I've seen them operate. And so what we've done is intentionally, instead, we still have governance and we still have a way of, getting feedback from people, but we bring together groups of people, sort of like I was describing for our curriculum work, that have the necessary expertise to move a program forward. and they shape a program, right? They create a program, they iterate on it, they shape it. They all give their input, but ultimately there's one person in charge of this task group that has to make a decision on how to move something forward. And so they take all the information that that group is providing for them, and they decide whether to advance something to be approved as a new program, for example. And I think having a clear decision maker can speed the time to a decision, because the decision maker is really trying to get the best information to make the best decision and advance then the concept for approval. And then we have a fairly abbreviated sort of process for approval. I mean, of course, as a CAO, I'm involved in that level of approval, but we also have a senior leadership team that spans all parts of the university that's involved in the approval as well. And ultimately, the president will approve things if he thinks that it's a worthwhile endeavor to pursue. But because of this, just bringing the right expertise into the room, acknowledging the clear decision maker to advance a concept, we are able to move very quickly. We don't have like long Senate hearings on, those things just don't exist here. And so as a result, like once we know that we want a program, I mean, we can build a new program in 3 to 4 months. And so we don't take years. And similarly, when we sunset something, we have clear heuristics for how many students we need in a program. When it's not hitting them, we have a way to sunset it. And it also just takes, maybe a few months, if that, because we've already defined what success is for a program, what success isn't for a program. And we have lots of mechanisms to help students jump from one program to another, or allow them, if we have to sunset a program and there's students in that program, they finish their program. They have that opportunity. Like we won't take a program away from students, but we may stop enrolling students if it doesn't hit our minimum thresholds. So really, instead of a long sort of committee process with different senates involved and that sort of thing, we have groups that are chosen to be part of curriculum work because they bring the expertise into the room. And then we have clear heuristics about what it means when we have a new program. Like, when do we know we can launch it? When do we know it has to be sunset? And we have those hard conversations. We don't avoid them. But when we sunset a program, as I mentioned before, it doesn't mean that everyone lost their job. Like, these people, everyone in the room still has a role, and they're just going to be even more relevant in the new iteration of the major or whatever the program is that we happen to be talking about.
Absolutely. So it sounds like having really clearly defined roles, processes, and metrics is really key here. And this made me think of the assessment process. I'm sure that this is something you think about a lot, particularly when thinking about making sure that your programs are successful. And I know something that a lot of institutions struggle with is, they do that assessment, they see the metrics, but then actually responding and implementing that feedback. So can you talk to us a little bit about kind of, what does your process look like there? How are you making sure that you're actually able to implement those findings?
Yep. And you're right. We do think a lot about this, and we do have a really robust assessment program. And so we have a series of program assessment tools that we utilize with our different business units. And so such that we're pulling data on an annual basis about all of our programs. And so we're touching base within a year about some critical sort of, and we're really basing this on learning outcomes largely. Like, we've identified the learning outcomes associated with the program. We've identified the learning outcomes associated with the courses, and we've mapped all of the assessments to the different learning outcomes. And then our LMS allows us to pull data about whether or not these learning outcomes are being met according to our metrics. And so we're able to do that like constantly. And we do that. And that's part of our curriculum working group. They take a look at those data. And so there's the sort of the constant sort of iteration on the courses, but that also builds up into sort of a 3-year plan. And so every 3 years, we take the last 3 years worth of data about our learning outcomes, And then we do sort of a self-reflection on how we've achieved our goals, what we've met and what we haven't met, and come up with a series of action points that we want to take action on. And every third year, we also bring in an external perspective outside of Unity, several actually external perspectives to weigh in on our self-reflection, on the data that we've been collecting, to ensure that this is not so internally focused that we don't, take a step back and take that broader view and ask that an external entity to give us advice. And so we do that on a 3-year basis for every program. But I think we don't just wait till that 3-year point to make any changes. We're constantly making changes in between. And in fact, every course in our distance education program has a refresh schedule. So there are rebuilds of the course that are planned for, as well as refreshes to the course that are planned for. So our curriculum is consistently and constantly refreshed. And because, again, we're basing it on, these are our expectations for students being able to meet learning outcomes. And when we look at the data, if they're being met, that's great news. If they're not, what do we need to change to ensure that they're being met? And that means that our curriculum, I mean, honestly, just, obviously I work at Unity. I'm very proud of the work we do at Unity, and our curriculum is current. We spend a lot of time ensuring that we are trying to keep things fresh. We're not pulling out the slide deck from 10 years ago and showing it to the students, or it's a 5-year refresh. I mean, it's constant for us. It's what we care about. It's the heart of what we do.
That's wonderful. And I imagine something you're thinking about too is serving different types of learners. I saw that, Unity has been very successful in increasing students in some of the more, non-traditional categories, whether that's older learners, first gen, students with Pell Grants. So how are you thinking about serving those students and making sure that, Unity is really the right place for them?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think this is where, if we go back a little bit to the concepts of our faculty model, become really important. So we have teams of learning experience designers at the university that focus on different pedagogies, really. And so we have a team that focuses on the online learning. We have a different team that focuses on the in-person learning. And they're designing the curriculum to suit the needs of those different audiences rather than having one team try and support all the different audiences. So those experienced learning designers are actually staying abreast of the latest techniques within sort of that pedagogical style. And we're seeking, especially in our online environments, what kinds of XR, VR tools can we leverage to ensure that there are some sort of tactile types of experiences in our online curriculum. We're also thinking about how to ensure that when a student comes to Unity, they come in and they have an experience that sort of that lasts throughout their time with us. Because one thing that happens when you don't have sort of a cohesive approach to learning design is, for example, every course might look different in the LMS. I mean, you might have to navigate it differently. Resources in one course are in this one section, but in a different course or somewhere else. Sometimes the syllabus isn't really the syllabus. That is what we've eliminated by taking sort of a more sort of centralized approach to the overall course template. So when students come to us, they actually have a first course in really kind of learning how to learn with us. And that's either online or in person. Like, what can you expect as a student throughout your program here? And then we have a certain level of uniformity within how the courses are designed for the different types of learners, so that they know what to expect. They don't have to learn a new navigational system every time they're in a new course. And our students also have the luxury of taking one course at a time. So they are really just able to focus on understanding the material associated with one course instead of trying to put together all the information from like 4 or 5 different courses at a time. And so I think that also helps students sort of focus on sort of that one content area and trying to really understand it, like going into it in depth for a certain period of time and understanding that. And I think sometimes that reduces sort of the noise around the student and enables them to really focus and be more successful in that type of curriculum.
That's wonderful. I would love to, maybe move a little bigger picture here in our
Mhm.
conversation.
Mhm.
It kind of in my background research, I was reading it. It sounds like Unity has made a number of big bets over the years, which is fairly rare to see in higher ed. So, pivoting to a majority online institution, kind of selling the land of your former campus. Can you kind of tell the listeners a little bit about some of those changes and kind of the thought process that went into making those big bets?
Yeah, sure. We came to online learning as an institution probably a little bit later than most other institutions. I think we started from a very sort of traditional kind of 2 semester type of program at a campus in rural Maine. And I think this campus in rural Maine was facing some of the challenges that people were starting to talk about within the national sort of landscape of higher education. It was a small campus, under 1,000 learners. It was in a remote area, a rural area, and a small endowment. Right, those were the 3 factors that kept coming up. Like, schools in this situation had to think about how they were going to survive in the decades to come, and so Unity was one of those schools, and they did start thinking about what that meant for the school. And so in 2016, they started thinking about, well, how can we have some online programming here at Unity? And so when the pandemic hit, we did have online programming. So we weren't starting from scratch. So that was a real benefit for us. And of course, different institutions had to tackle the pandemic in different ways. And we did go fully online for about a year, even our in-person programs. But what we found out during that time, or actually when we started inviting students back to campus, we were really surprised how many students enjoyed learning online, because we had already established a pretty robust system of online learning. So when our students pivoted to online learning, it wasn't quite as messy maybe as it was for some other institutions, because we had an infrastructure in place, we had an approach in place, and that sort of thing. And so we really understood at that time that online learning was a critical piece of what we do, and that many students preferred that type of learning, because that's what worked for them. That allowed students to stay within their communities, keep their job, keep their family going, like do all the things they needed to do and still make progress towards a degree. And so that was an interesting time at Unity, and understanding that if we're living in this online space, what do learners need online? What do learners need in person? Because we do have in-person students as well. And they need some level of flexibility, regardless if they're learning online or in person. And so we started thinking about the structures that we were operating in, and how could we add more flexibility for students? And that's really when we really pivoted away from 2 semesters, for example, because up to that point, our in-person students had been in the 2 semester kind of system. But if you have a term-based system that is year-round, it's a much more flexible system for students, because they can stop out for one term for maybe 5 weeks and then come back, rather than stopping out for 15, 16 weeks or a year and then having to come back. Like, that level of flexibility was sort of unprecedented, especially in in-person kinds of programs. It also means if a student signs up for coursework in a term and it doesn't work out for whatever reason, there could be a medical situation, a family situation, when they withdraw from that term, they might be withdrawing from 3 credits instead of 15 credits, right? So the stakes are a lot lower in terms of the intellectual investment, the financial investment, the time investment, when you have to pull out of 3 credits versus 15. So those are some examples of the kind of flexibility I'm talking about, so that students can really learn at times that make sense for them. They can even plan their learning over these sort of 5-week intervals and say, in this 5-week term, I'm going to be doing some other things. I'm going to stop out and then come back and start making more progress towards my degree. I think for us, flexibility became a key piece. Flexibility and also the affordability piece, because that's the other thing we hear about all the time is students under these mountains of debt that are really just, they're not sustainable in the long term. And so we kept asking ourselves, how can we maintain an affordable tuition, maintain flexibility for our students? And they're easy questions to ask and they're hard questions to answer. And so flexibility, affordability, obviously are critical. How you achieve those things is really challenging. I mean, shifting from 2 semesters to a year-round term-based schedule is a huge pivot. I mean, everyone has to change everything they do. The students have to think differently. The employees have to think differently. We have to work with our compliance agencies differently. Like the financial budgeting is different, everything. So it sounds easy on the surface. It's much harder to achieve operationally. And we were willing to make those hard changes. At the end of the day, if the students need flexibility, we need to provide it. If they need we've actually committed to maintaining a flat tuition through 2030. And that's quite a commitment. And that means that we really think carefully about how we engage in the work we do. And it's not always easy. I think the questions are so simple, it can sound a lot simpler than it really is to achieve.
Absolutely.
Wow, I gotta jump in, Bridget, because we're running out of time. I know you have more questions, but I want to make this great conversation, by the way. I want to make sure we have enough time so we can ask Erika the last question. Erika, what do you see as the future of higher education?
Yeah, and that's a tough one for sure. And I think for higher education in general, and for Unity more specifically, technology is becoming it is a piece of what we do. And we keep hearing a lot about AI, and we can't help but think about what AI means for the future. At Unity, we've always been thinking about AI and how important it is for both our employees and our students. So we were quick to always tell the students that AI is here and you may be using it and you're using it in these ways. Like instead of trying to detect it and say you can't use it, we were trying to understand how to embrace it, how to change our assessments so that the AI became irrelevant to whether our assessments are telling us what we need to know. We just pivoted to that space. Like AI is here. How can we all embrace it? How can we leverage it to keep tuition flat, for example, those sorts of things. But I think sort of at a fundamental level, what I think really interesting about AI is up until AI became sort of the hot topic, we were always pretty convinced that the knowledge brokers were the kingpins. Like they were the ones that were holding all the information. And so because of that, education was kind of untouchable. In the advancement of AI, knowledge brokerage is really, it's not the premium it was before. And so I think this is what institutions are going to have to answer for themselves. How do we remain relevant? And in a day when you can get on your phone and use Gemini and ask the question and get the answer. Whereas before you might have had to always go to the professor for that, right? So how do we stay relevant in this time? And I think there are definitely things that we bring to the table that are important, but that's sort of what everyone's going to be grappling with as we move forward. And I think for higher ed, as we touched on today, it's been seen as sort of a slow moving industry that's slow to respond to change and to workforce demand. And as a result, we've seen public trust kind of erode in this area. And we need to be able to show, the higher education in general, we need to be able to sort of restore that trust, to be able to tell the public what is the value we are bringing to the table? Why are we worth the investment? And for all of us, we might not all be worth that $500,000 investment, And that's okay, but we might be worth a smaller investment if we can make the tuition affordable. And we have to get to those points. I think we have to question how the business model, the learning model, it's like the basic premise of how we work that we're questioning and adjusting, and that is tough. So I think that, it's not a one size fits all kind of situation. And what we found at Unity is that we are providing information that people need in programs that are relevant, and we're staying true to our mission. I think if all institutions look the same, then that's where there's going to be challenges for them on the horizon. I think institutions need to find some of the things they're good at and be able to sort of lean into those things. And so the differentiation becomes important. And I think we often like to say, all institutions like to say they're student focused, but to really kind of unpack what that means. And are they truly learner focused? Are they still hanging on to some traditions that aren't really serving the learners? And can you discard some of those traditions? And those are challenging conversations for institutions to have. But I think with AI at the forefront of what's going on, we need to be offering students really valuable services. And I think every university is going to find that the value in what they offer is distinct to them. We're not going to all offer the same value proposition, and that's okay. We need to lean into the differentiation.
Absolutely. I just want to say, Erika, I believe that if someone wants to know what the future of higher education is going to look like, I think you just need to study Unity. I really do. I think you can follow your work, it's like from the BOT to the president, all the way on down. It's like this culture of innovation. It's mind blowing to me. And I'm sure listeners are feeling the same way I am. So fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. First, I want to outro my co-host. She is Bridget Moran. She's a senior content manager at CourseDog. Bridget, thank you as always. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too. And let's outro our guest today, ladies and gentlemen. She's your guest. She is Dr. Erika Latty. She's the president of the enterprise and chief academic officer at Unity Environmental University. Erika, thank you so very much for being here.
Great. Thanks very much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. We did as well. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp. Thank you for listening to this uninterrupted episode brought to you by CourseDog. CourseDog is the intelligent academic operations platform unifying how higher ed managers schedule curriculum, catalog assessments, and more, built on a layer of actionable analytics and seamless integrations with every major SIS and LMS. CourseDog is where academic operations drive student success. To learn more, please go to CourseDog.com.